Good evening. Thank you for joining us for a continuation of our Cult Week. Tonight's story is a continuation of that, and we're going to be talking about becoming a cult. Last night we talked a little bit about the signs of that you're in a cult, or how to look for signs of a cult. Now we're going to talk about how you become a cult. This is basically a story of a good thing that ended in the death of a 19-year-old named Lucas Leonard. It's a story of a Bible study that becomes a full-blown cult and concentrates on the beginning of the church and basically how it became a cult. Tomorrow night we will continue this story with the actual death of Lucas Leonard and what happened at that aspect. But tonight we're just going to talk about the Bible study itself. So there's a family tree that I could show you, but basically if you'll go to the link inside the description here, the Word of Life Church, it will show you, take you to the site that shows all pictures of these individuals and kind of what families that they belong to. This ends up in finally being only 4 families involved: the Irwin family, the Lucas family, the Wright family, and then of course the Morey family, or Linda Morey for sure. Okay. But I want to tell you a little bit about those. And I know it's going to be kind of hard, but I want you to kind of keep these in your mind if you can. It starts off with Jerry Irwin. And now Jerry is a self-proclaimed prophet. And he was the only one that spoke directly to God. Remember that we talked about that last night, where only one is considered to be able to speak with God. Well, Jerry was that one. Everybody got their information from Jerry. He started the church in 1984, left in 1990, and then came back in about 1992, and then he died in 2012. Tracy Irwin was Jerry's second wife, and she's the mother of all the other folks, basically, that are listed in the Irwin family here. She's active in the church, but she stays in the background, and she was kind of thought to be able to rein in her husband and kids as far as the church was concerned. But that really didn't work well either. Tiffany Irwin is their daughter, and she's a self-ordained assistant pastor to her father Jerry, and then pastor after his death. Now, I didn't know one could become self-ordained. I guess it's like getting on the internet and, becoming an ordained minister of the Unification Church or something. Who knows? But Tiffany always felt like she was special. She's a self-proclaimed prophet. She's supposedly a leader. She was better than everybody, right? She was just that good. But she also became known as having quite the temper in her teenage and older years. Dan and Joe Irwin were the muscle for the church. That's the 2 older brothers. And, they're big boys, and they smoked pot and drank heavily, and I guess that was just okay. It was God, guns, and dope, I guess. But they had a gun collection as well. And then there's Linda Morey. She is an absolute psychopath, or sociopath, depending on how you want to look at it. But I think she is a mean, cruel, and individual, and she craved power like none other. She created a one-woman campaign for the hatred of the Leonard family, I promise you. Bruce Leonard, who was one of the original members of the Bible study. He divorced, and then he married Debbie after many years of friendship through both of their marriages. He's the father of Luke, Chris, and many others. He has a daughter from a previous marriage named Crystal, and she will become very obvious as the story goes on. He is considered to be reformed and deprogrammed. Remember, we talked about deprogrammed last night, so, be aware of that topic. Debbie Leonard married Bruce after her divorce. Now, Sarah is her daughter from a previous marriage, and she's the mother of Luke and Chris, as well as several others. And to this day, she still believes that what they did was the right thing, without a doubt. Crystal Leonard is the daughter of Bruce, the older daughter of Bruce, and she's a strong supporter of the church until 2014. She started worrying about the direction of the church and the treatment of her brothers, Chris and Luke. Sarah is considered to be a very suspicious, pious, and self-important member. She sort of served as the tattletale for reporting everything everyone was doing directly to Tiffany via text messages. And she moved home in 2013 with 4 kids. She is Debbie's daughter from a previous marriage. Luke is a typical teenager. He's rebellious. He was accused of witchcraft. And what's ironic about that, his only witchcraft was a love potion when he was about 12, right? Good kid, but a bit ornery. He went up against Tiffany more times than most. Chris is Luke's brother, and he's also a typical teenager. He's not quite as rebellious as Luke, but he would say anything to get out of being beaten. And he appears to be quite the follower. Now, Grace, I'm not really sure what to say about Grace. She kind of started out normal, but the more she was around Sarah, the more she made accusations. Now, Grace is the youngest sister of Chris and Luke, and is Debbie and Bruce's youngest daughter, or younger daughter. One accusation that she made was that she dreamed she had molested Sarah's kids in a dream, right? But she continued those allegations, and she said she molested Sarah's kids. Then she said Luke and Chris molested Sarah's kids. And then she said, well, Luke and Chris molested me. And all of this, of course, feeds into Sarah's paranoia. So I'm not really sure about that. Rick Wright, for all intents and purposes, I think was a really good guy. Rick is actually Debbie's brother. And my biggest complaint against Rick was that he stepped back and continued in the church and let Jerry Irwin just take over again. And I resent that. I think he should have never done that. But he started the deliverance movement and freedom for the members of the church, and they loved him. But he stepped down willingly when Jerry returned and pushed him out, basically. So how did the Word of Life Christian Church become a cult? It's located, or was located, in a red brick building in Chadwick, New York. And it used to exist in that building. The church purchased the building from the city in 1990. The 3-story building was originally used as a school. Many iterations inside the buildings ended with the old gymnasium becoming the large sanctuary, and a smaller room outside the gymnasium becoming the small sanctuary. Then there were classes and nurseries that took over the classrooms, and so forth on the first 2 floors. The entire 3rd floor became the residence of the entire Irwin family. In all honesty, I've determined, in my opinion, that the transformation to the Word of Life cult begins and ends with the Irwin family. Jerry Irwin started with a simple Bible study that moved to a different building. But as with most cults, it began gradually. You can see results of this in the articles and the YouTube videos and the writings and the books about this cult. And I also am going to refer you to the article that I wrote, Cult Signs, Scary Cults, What is a Cult? That we kind of talked about last night a little bit, for a little bit more details on how that cult operates. As with other cults, becoming a cult was slightly gradual. Once the group moved to the old school building, then they began working in the yard, cleaning up the property, having rummage sales, and even offering baked goods to the neighbors, right? Like many religious organizations, proselytizing was part of their bylaws, going door to door, bringing more people to the church. More people means more money, right? Local ministers were invited to speak at the church. Jerry Irwin is noted as saying this in an actual sermon, and I quote, I could be like Jim Jones and make a whole lot of money and deceive a whole lot of people. We could start our own commune. I could have 20 wives, like I'd want 20 wives, but maybe 20 slaves. How's that? Now, this is a man that said this from the pulpit of his church. Disturbing. So before you could say becoming a cult, or even Jerry Irwin, it seems that this small, friendly, and open church became a full-fledged cult. Gates went up. People disappeared into this closed, dark building. They stopped proselytizing. Outsiders were no longer welcome. None of the local ministers came anymore. It was a gradual process that began in 1990 and basically continued over the next 25 years. Some say it began around 1989 when Jerry started denouncing a growing acceptance of homosexuality as a godly alternative lifestyle. This guy was a true homophobe. He didn't want homosexuals anywhere near his church. He was afraid someone would catch it, right? As if it was contagious. He became increasingly paranoid and angry, and his congregation became the target for his rage. He started saying things like, I know what you did. He's the prophet, remember? As if he was all-knowing. He would punish church members for these slights or sins or what he would consider failures of theirs, right? But in 1990, he became kind of restless. So he and his family left the church for another church a little further north. His rambling narrative about this time basically portrays his narcissism. For example, it's always the other church's fault. It couldn't possibly be his preaching or his teaching or his beliefs, right? It had to be the church members' fault that he didn't connect with them, not his. So when he left, though, the Word of Life Church, he left Rick Wright, Debbie's brother, in charge of the congregation. That was an awesome move. Pastor Rick loosened the ropes, opened up a bit. The congregation flourished to about 80 members. That's huge for a small town, right? Word got around. So what happens? Jerry becomes very nervous and jealous. It's been said that he would call Pastor Rick and ask for all the details. He went so far as to ask him to record the sessions and send the recordings to him for critique, right? So he became so enraged and jealous that he and his family finally returned around 1992-93 time frame. He announced himself as a prophet, thus the true beginning of becoming a cult, right? Over a short period of time, he drove Pastor Rick to the back and became the pastor again. This is when things got real. Phone calls to the church would go straight to voicemail. Any kind of conversation to any church members would go straight to voicemail. They would need Pastor Jerry's permission and approval before taking any call. Remember, we talked about that last night, too. People, of course, started leaving the church going, I'm not putting up with this crap. Pastor Jerry is said to use racial slurs during this time as well. So with this move back, though, he and his family needed a place to live. So the prophet declared that the top floor of the church is going to become his family's home. Church members had to work for a living in order to pay their 10+% to the church, right? But after work, as a member of this church, they were supposed to work another full 40-hour week working on the church, cleaning the church, building out the top floor of the church for his family. At one point, they even had a kennel up there and were breeding dogs and stuff. So, but it said that this top floor became this mansion, if you will. Now, it was so big that the kids got to ride their bikes through the halls. In one room was a basketball court, another one had a trampoline. But I think the real true end of it all for some members was when it was discovered that there was a full-blown spa equipment, including a hot tub in this upper chamber, if you will. And some folks kind of resented that the church money was being spent on luxury just for the Irwins, right? So it became a shrine to the Irwin family, and Jerry kind of justified this by quoting Ezra 1:4. And Ezra 1:4 reads in the King James Version as, "And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem." The contemporary English version states, "Everyone else must provide what is needed. They must give money, supplies, and animals, as well as gifts for rebuilding God's temple." Now, keep something in mind, though, about this. This verse is actually talking about people returning from exile, right? It wasn't really talking about building a church for the pastor. It was talking about people coming from exile, and you're supposed to help them. But this was the word of the prophet, and what he said went, so this is what happened. Around the same time, they created a school. Now, the school was never certified. It was never accredited. The teachers didn't have any special education, certifications, degrees, even nothing. This was homeschooling by cult, I promise you. Only allowing their beliefs and their laws to be taught to the children, right? As a result, years later, many of these same children had zero social skills or even basic skills to be able to survive the outside world. In a bit of irony, Pastor Jerry Irwin thought that denominations like, Baptist, Assembly of God, Christian, Catholic, that type of thing, were doctrines of Satan. In one particular church service, he preached, denominations were to keep you in a backslidden state, to keep you in an ineffective, ignorant place. He went on to say, you can prove just about anything you want by using these scriptures. You can take these out and make them say just whatever you want. Hello, pot. This is kettle. Anyway, he also began a campaign of playing what I hate to term the molestation game around 94. He began to accuse individuals and even families, entire families, of child molestation without any proof or even a glimpse of it happening. It starts with a period of false accusations of molestation that continues through to 2015. In later writings, it's thought that the Irwin family had a strange explanation for general horsing around like kids do. Any child that was touching another child in any manner was considered molestation. You know how like two little boys, one will grab the other little boy or little girl's hand and lead them to the bathroom? Well, that was molestation. Two boys or two girls horsing around, and wrestling each other on the ground, that was molestation. So, you got to take it with a grain of salt. It's also during this period that local ministers are said to say that the church is going to be sunk as long as Jerry's at the helm. That, of course, pissed Jerry off to the max, and it motivated him to be even more controlling, if you can imagine. One more thing to note is that he was married prior to his marriage to Tracy Irwin. And he had children from that marriage as well. The divorce was so bad that it took 10 to 15 years for him to find his children from that previous marriage. And in the end, the children didn't want anything to do with him whatsoever. Can't say that I blame them. Anyway, somewhere around 97, the cult became further ingrained as a cult when Jerry became the ultimate matchmaker. In the standard cult way of thinking, it was the prophet that now decided who belonged to whom. In one particular case, he instructed a female parishioner to perform the paperwork for a male parishioner to get a divorce from his wife. Now, you might not think that's so strange, but consider the fact that the man did not necessarily want a divorce from his wife, nor did his wife want a divorce from her husband, but Pastor Jerry has spoken. This is the way it shall be. We talk about this in another post a little bit later on, but let me just say this. So this female parishioner that prepared the paperwork went on to marry this male parishioner because Jerry matchmaked them together. She eventually divorced him, and get this, she becomes married to Crystal, Bruce's daughter from a previous marriage. Now, if that isn't something. Anyway. In any case, he began this manipulation of his congregation and matchmaking, and I consider these to be not arranged marriages, but forced marriages. In fact, you'll find that most, if not all of those, end in divorce. There was no love involved whatsoever. This began kind of an era of indoctrination. Somewhere around 2003 and 2004, they began to use public shaming for anyone involved in simply being a kid, right? Things like I talked about a few minutes ago. Contact of any kind was molestation. He became a witch hunt, accusing various members of using witchcraft, which of course continued to be a theme again until 2015. He even said to the congregation once, some of you still think your mind is your own to think what you want to think, whenever you want to think it. And you don't have a right. That's just the seed of sin that'll lead eventually to death. You cannot think any thoughts of your own unless I give them to you. Cult behavior. So for the first decade of the year 2000, other members became more involved in the church leadership. Sarah Leonard moved in with the Irwins at one point, and she receives indoctrination into the ways of the cult. Sarah then marries someone that, of course, Pastor Jerry said she had to marry. She has 4 kids, and then, of course, eventually divorces, right? Linda Morey also rises to power at this time and becomes attached to Tiffany Irwin. I mean, attached. Around 2009, Tiffany herself becomes self-ordained, filling out this paperwork from the Unification Church, I guess, and given the association of assistant pastor to her father. Then came the strange year of 2012. It becomes a rather ominous year to the Irwin family. Tiffany used to keep journals constantly. She had stacks and stacks and stacks of them that I'm sure she thought no one would ever read. Well, guess what? They did. But in these journals, she even admits that she lusted after Luke. Lusted after him. Now, you'll find later on that she sure didn't treat him like that. But she also makes this declaration, sorry guys, that all men are rapists. All men are rapists. I apologize to the entire male persuasion for this idiot woman. Pastor Tiffany and her two comrades in arms, who are Linda Morey and Sarah Leonard, become the eyes and ears of the church. They notice all the failings of church members and they talk about them in detail. Now, it's kind of funny because her father did not approve of standing around talking or gossiping, right? So they didn't do that. They communicated via text. I'm not sure that's a whole lot different, but I guess that loophole was important. I guess they just really didn't get the hypocrisy in it. Anyway, on May the 9th of 2012, Jerry Irwin literally had a stroke. Literally. And you don't see him in church much, if at all, after that time period. Assistant Pastor Tiffany takes over the congregation. Jerry's wife, Tracy, is convinced of two things. Thing one, she's going to do anything she can to make Jerry whole again. And thing two, if Jerry dies, he will come back to life. After all, he's the prophet, right? So there's no way he should be able to die. Tracy began purchasing very expensive equipment to heal Jerry. She even went as far as to purchase a hyperbaric chamber for $30,000. Now, it was known in the medical community that this chamber is not known to help stroke victims in any case that is ever even talked about. But Tracy firmly believed that he would come back to life if he died, and if she kept him in this hyperbaric chamber. I keep saying hyperbolic, maybe so. But anyway, hyperbaric, it should have been, hyperbaric chamber. So during this time, Jerry also told Tiffany that he thought she was rather high-minded and arrogant. Well, that may be true. I think he basically said that because he was jealous. She was now getting the attention that he craved so very much. In December of that year of 2012, Jerry dies. Now, here's the funny part. It's not really funny. So, Jerry and Tracy were in another state, going to the Mayo Clinic or some clinic, off-the-wall clinic that was going to help him. And so they were in the hotel room waiting to go to this medical appointment, basically, when Jerry dies. Now, this comes kind of a weird situation. So here's what supposedly happened. He dies. Now, she is convinced that he can come back to life. And when he did not immediately come back to life, she puts some things in motion. She calls her boys and she says, come take the seats out of the van. We need to load your dad up. We're going to put him in the van and we're going to take him to Missouri. Now, Mel Bond is the name of a guy that is a faith healer, and he's been in operation for many years in Missouri. While he's known for his miracle healings, he does have certain conditions and chooses the individuals he wants to heal, right? But that's okay. Tracy knows this is going to happen. So she and her sons load Jerry up in the van. Now, remember, he's dead, right? And they travel across several states to see Mel Bond and have him resurrect Jerry. There's only one little problem. They were refused to be seen by Mr. Bond. He just simply wasn't interested. So Tracy is finally convinced on the phone with a friend that she's got to return back to the motel in the other state and notify the proper authorities that the death has occurred. You can't just pick this guy up and take him where you want, right? By the time that notification is done, it's been more than 48 hours, if you can believe. Now, you can read all about that particular strange occurring in Susan Ashline's book, Without a Prayer. It's a really good book about the death of Lucas Leonard and the Word of Life cult, and she includes many things that I don't really cover here. She does use the trial transcripts, as I have done, but she also has an incredible website with lots and lots of information about this case. And she can be found, of course, at susanashline.com. So anyway, back to this. Tracy and her brothers then notify Tiffany after 48 hours. By the way, Dad's gone, right? Tiffany informs the church. And then in January, after a proper period of mourning of 10 days, Tiffany now becomes the pastor of the Word of Life Church and announces that now she is the prophet. In an effort to keep her congregation, she relaxes a few rules for a while. So, the church is now a full-blown cult. Pastor Tiffany is in charge. Things become more and more severe, including charges of molestation, perversion, and witchcraft. Victims begin saying whatever they thought Tiffany wanted to hear just to avoid being punished. But that deserves its own story, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow night when we talk about the death of Lucas Leonard and the Word of Life cult. So, this kind of just shows you how this little Bible study came in to be a full-blown cult. And there are many, many things that occur and happen that I don't even bother to go into. It's a horrible, horrible situation. But let me just say a couple of things here. If you're a member of a cult or a formal member and you need help, I've got several groups, legitimate groups, that can help you. They'll talk to you, they'll encourage you, they'll provide resources to you, and basically I'm going to list them, and then their links are also found on the website. The Directory of Cult Recovery Resources, the Encourage Survivors of Cults and Abuse, the National Association of Forensic Counselors, and the Safe Passage Foundation. Many of these places actually have 24/7 chat windows that you can actually talk to somebody, and phone if you do decide that you need some help or would like to talk to somebody about it. One last thing to mention, don't forget, you need to join our Facebook group. It's really cool, and we go through a lot of things, and we discuss many cases in more depth than what you get either from the writing or from these videos. And you can find us in Facebook at True Crime Diaries Discussion. True Crime Diaries Discussion. And I've also put the links for that in the notes of the show notes of this video. So that's how a particular Bible study became a cult. And tomorrow night we're actually talking about the cult and how they killed Lucas Leonard. And I mean murdered him, in my opinion, and it's considered to be a fact. So tune in tomorrow night for Nanny Annie's bedtime stories. Probably be between 8 and 10 when we get back with you. And reach out to us any way you want. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Pinterest, and of course we have our own website at https://truecrimediaries.com. You want to send me an email, send it to Annie at truecrimediaries.com. We'll talk to you